Just how big an issue is water damage to buildings in Australia, and what are the possible health issues from mould biotoxin exposure, like chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or CIRS? Join Amy Skilton in her comprehensive course, Unravelling CIRS WDB, which will give you the appropriate skills to both screen and manage your patients on their return journey to wellness. For more information and to register, please go to bioceuticals.com.au and click on the Education tab. This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. Joining us on the line today is Audra Starkey, who's a clinically trained nutritionist, accredited trainer, shift work veteran, and host of the Healthy Shift Worker podcast. After more than 20 years in the aviation industry, Audra decided to switch careers and complete a Bachelor of Health Science, majoring in nutritional medicine to gain a better understanding of some of the impacts of circadian rhythm disruption and poor dietary habits and what they have on our health. Welcome to FX Medicine, Audra. How are you?
Hi, Andrew. Thanks very much for having me.
It's our pleasure. Now, I've got to ask first, we talk about shift work and we think we know exactly what it is, but what exactly is shift work apart from daytime work?
Yeah, I think formally it's regarded as, anything working outside hours of, between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. But I think, a lot of people these days more and more people are starting to do that, to, kind of work outside the regular, 9 to 5 that we've sort of come to know over the years. And of course, it definitely applies to a lot of different industries, manufacturing, transportation, the healthcare industry. It really does form quite a lot of people. And I know that there's, I think, close to, just here in Australia, Andrew, there's almost 2 million people that do actually work shift work. So it's quite a lot of the population, and I know that they're definitely in need of some and help and guidance to keep themselves healthy, that's for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, being an RN, the thing that really killed me energy-wise was it wasn't so much shift work per se, it was the way that the shifts were structured. Whereas, for instance, my sister is a psych nurse and they had like longer shifts, but boy, were they looked after with their energy, i.e. with time off. So it's really interesting that even within the same overarching profession, there's vast differences in how shifts are managed. So I guess the next question is, what are the health impacts of shift working? And it seems obvious, but it's far deeper than what the surface suggests.
Yeah, and I agree. And just kind of getting back to what you just mentioned, then, Andrew, I totally agree with it. Not all shift working workplaces are the same. That is definitely for sure, depending on the occupation, or even it might be the same industry, but depends on what state that you're in amongst the nursing profession, for example. So it can definitely be vastly different. But I suppose, when it comes to, some of the chronic health conditions that shift workers are renowned for, it's because of that circadian disruption and the sleep restriction, obviously leads to many metabolic and chronic health conditions such as insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, gastrointestinal complaints, certain cancers. It's certainly not rosy, when you dive kind of into the research. But I think it's vitally important that we make shift workers and organisations aware of that, because I think a lot of corporations just immediately think of, fatigue. We need to help manage fatigue side of things, right? But it's way deeper than that. It's not just about fatigue at all.
There's also, it's almost an assumption when we talk about shift work and we're thinking about a person having shift work, we're thinking about them in one spot having the shift work. But even from your experience, you're moving across the world. You're moving through different time zones. So it's not just the time in between working shifts, but it's also the time that shift starts in a different country and all of these weird impacts. I mean, there's so much going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And although in saying that, Andrew, I didn't fly in the aviation industry. I was based at the airport, so I didn't quite those.
But relative, for the cabin crew and flight staff, yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's actually really interesting you bring that up, because Qantas at the moment are currently undergoing some major research studies called Project Sunrise, I think, in regards to they're trying to, fly from Sydney to London kind of direct. Yeah, 19 hours. So they're doing a lot of research at the moment to, looking at the light exposure and the timing of when we eat, because those two are very powerful triggers of the circadian rhythm. So it's wonderful that they are actually looking at doing that, because even I was talking to a lady that just flew back out of Thailand the other day, and it was a midnight flight, and she said, Audra, it was crazy, because we got on the flight at midnight and within like an hour and a half they're serving us this really big meal, like when everyone's really wanting to sleep. So it's kind of not the ideal time to be giving that food out, which is, so kudos to Qantas, I have to say, as a previous employer of mine. They really are looking at helping to reduce some of those deleterious effects of jet lag, which I think every single listener will be able to relate to.
So let's talk about these major impacts. You mentioned insulin resistance, and that in part would be due to, eating at weird hours and things like that. But let's go deeper into that. What are the major health effects that affect shift workers?
Yeah, so, and I guess I remember, when I was at uni and I was just so absorbed, so I went and studied nutrition, but I was so absorbed into shift work health and wellbeing, and just reading so many journal articles and clinical trials that had been done on shift work. And these conditions kept coming up, and to be honest, because this is a bit of a personal thing, I kind of became a little bit emotional about it, because I thought, this is crazy. Like, we're not told about this. We're not given this awareness.
No, you are not taught about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, so just before going down that track, I wanted to, I guess, highlight the fact that even just because these clinical trials of shift workers have come up and they've highlighted these chronic health conditions, I would sort of step back and think, well, okay, there is that certain amount that is going to happen because we're up at I like to call stupid o'clock, a coined term by one of my clients, which I think is very relevant. Are these people that they're doing these studies on, have they received any educational support on how to take care of their health that maybe would have altered perhaps the outcomes of a lot of this research? And I firmly believe that, yes, that kind of would be the case. So I just wanted to kind of put that into kind of play, because I'm all about sort of stepping back and kind of trying to reverse engineer things a little bit to kind of help to mitigate some of these chronic health conditions. But yeah, for sure, the insulin resistance and the pre-diabetes and the type 2 diabetes is very, unfortunately, very kind of prevalent amongst the shift working population, and it can be down to a lot of a myriad of factors, of course, and the timing of when we eat, which we know we're going to get into more about shortly, definitely plays a big role. But of course, what we're eating, we know, and Andrew, you will know yourself, being the shift worker, you know that we get stuck in this vicious cycle because of our disruption to our sleep wake cycle, that we feel so tired all the time that we don't always make the healthiest food choices.
Yeah. Well, I was also very concerned. Like, I have questioned international flight staff about, has anybody taught them? And indeed, what you say is nobody ever. I was surprised, particularly on one flight. There was one nurse, one teacher, and somebody that had done pre-med. So we're talking about medically trained individuals, and nobody had talked to them about or had exposed them to any research pertaining to illnesses of shift work and circadian rhythm disruption, things like that. Not at any time. It was really interesting just reading recently how, it seems to be now set in stone that there's an increase in, was it breast cancer and melanoma, strangely, from flight staff?
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, but in saying that though, Andrew, when we think about it, shift working companies, what are one of the biggest expenses that they have to endure is high sick leave, right? So, but poor sleep is one of the biggest causes of it, debilitates our immune system. So if we can actually, again, reverse engineer things a little bit and start teaching people through, better sleep and lifestyle habits how to actually improve their sleep, along with there, of course, needs to be changes within the organisation in regards to rostering. I mean, that the R word is definitely usually a hot topic of debate.
Yes.
But if we can think about yes, it will cost that initial financial thing to start educating shift workers, but in the long run, potentially it's going to save them millions of dollars, because it's providing that education and support for people right from the get-go. And the sleep thing is a huge thing that actually in all of my work I actually put it first before nutrition, because I think, I kind of realised, I guess, get frustrated there for a while, even working with clients, that there's kind of no point telling somebody, you should be eating that, you should be doing this, et cetera, et cetera. If their eyes are hanging out their head, they're so tired, they're not going to want to do it.
Yeah.
So we've kind of got to work. I always kind of felt when I was working nutrition first, I felt like I was putting the cart before the horse. So I thought I need to flip this around a little bit. When I'm working with my clients, I need to focus on their sleep first, because I know if I can improve their sleep, they're more likely to eat better, which, has that flow-on effect to everything. It used to fascinate me a little bit, Andrew, is because, when somebody works 9 to 5, they say, or even if they finished at 6 o'clock at night, they actually don't come back to work until about 16 hours later.
Yeah.
And that they've already had a really nice bit of sleep. So yet some of the shift workers have these 8-hour minimum turnarounds. Even 10 is not enough in my book.
Yeah.
But that's like asking someone who works 9 to 5, say if they finish work at 6, and asking them to come back at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
It just would not happen. So I never kind of have understood where this minimum turnaround of such a small minimum turnaround kind of comes into play when we're kind of attacking those that are the most vulnerable with sleep, kind of making it worse.
Yes, and a flow on for that with, say, the medical staff, when you're talking about doing a late shift which ends at 11 and then you're on an early shift which starts at 7, that's an 8-hour break. And as you say, within that 8 hours you have to clock off, get home, wind down, get ready for bed, get into bed, go to sleep, then wake up, get ready for work, go to work. So you don't get 8 hours sleep. You'll get 5 or 4. And when you think about the flow-on effects of that, well, that's the patience.
Absolutely. It's a kind of crazy world. And I guess it's kind of why I'm sort of doing this. I am trying to kind of raise some much needed awareness for both. It's a 50-50 responsibility of the employee and the employer. We've got to start doing things differently, because, given, it's the underlying factor is that circadian rhythm disruption, the sleep deprivation in its impact on our immune system, our mental health and well-being. As I alluded to you before, we're more likely to face cardiovascular diseases and stuff. It's not just about fatigue anymore.
No.
It's big, yeah.
Far deeper. So can shift workers indeed be healthy? And then what do they have to do to be that?
It's $1 million question, isn't it? Oh, my goodness, yeah. Well, I suppose, of course, I do believe it. This is kind of why I do what I do. But, a caveat there is, of course, and we alluded to before, Andrew, it depends a lot on the actual job, what you do, where you work, who you'll work for, even from the local management perspective of how, open they are to actually being taking care of their staff health. I think if you are in that environment from the get-go, then obviously you've got a lot better chance of being a healthy shift worker. But as I said before, to me, absolutely everything comes back to education. And I can say just myself, over 20 years of working in shift work, what frustrated me a little bit over the time is that each time I would perhaps go and see a healthcare practitioner, the words that I would always hear back is, well, you should just quit your job. And that kind of frustrated me, and even though I'm now a health practitioner and I get it, I understand why they're saying it, but it's kind of not helpful. And also I loved my job, and I know that there are a lot of people out there in industries, whether it's a police, nursing, paramedic, veterinary, they absolutely love their job.
Mm.
Just give us some guidance on how to stay healthy, or to at least mitigate some of those chronic health conditions that I alluded to before. And I've really lost count now of how many people who have actually come up to me after I've delivered a seminar and said to me, Audra, where were you 20 years ago when I needed you?
Yeah.
Or I even had a lady say to me, where were you 40 years ago when I needed you?
Oh, wow.
I had to say, well, I was probably only about 5 years old, so I wouldn't have been very helpful.
I've got to say to that point that you made about a health practitioner saying just quit your job, it doesn't solve the problem, because there's another person who will take that job.
But we need shift workers too. We need people. The world would literally stop spinning if we didn't have, shift workers.
Absolutely.
And we need somebody to be able to call at 2:00 in the morning if we've got an emergency, which I hope will never happen to anyone listening. But we need somebody there, and I think because of that, we need to be doing whatever we physically possibly can to help them take care of their own health, because a lot of them also are in the healthcare setting themselves.
And forgive me for concentrating a little bit on the healthcare setting, because it is, perhaps a little bit of a penchant that I have. But, the ability in some instances to get at least some rest. So there was, on some night, depending on the work, on how heavy the workload was, obviously that's going to depend entirely on which ward you're on, what type of work you're doing, but there would be the time to catch a nap. Is this of benefit, or does it actually create more problems, these little mini naps?
Oh, yeah, definitely the benefit is always is there, but is it practical in most workplaces? That's kind of the thing. And I know the likes of Google and Apple, they have these napping pods that they've brought into the workplace for their staff to literally have somewhere where they can actually nap. And it's very well done. It's very well designed to block out all light, noise. It's even got a timer on it for about 20 minutes so that after, 20 minutes that they kind of have to kind of get up. And if it was me, I'd love to see a napping pod placed in every shift working workplace everywhere. But again, it sort of depends on the workplace. I was doing some work for some 24/7 veterinary clinics just fairly recently, and for them it's not practical because, again, I suppose this comes back to a staffing issue, really, doesn't it? That they needed to be awake and alert and observant of their patients.
That's right.
So, that's where it gets a little bit. But hey, if they could get a bit of a rotating roster of at least one person, it just kind of tops up that sleep tank, basically, because you're experiencing that you've got those two things that's happening with sleep. Your sleep drive and your sleep rhythm are both mixed up, because you've got the sleep drive where you've got that build-up of adenosine in the brain to help you to kind of, put you to sleep. But then if you're awake at, 3:00 in the morning, you've got that circadian kind of misalignment. So you've got those two things attacking at the same time. But at least by, having that little bit of a nap, it's you're doing what the body instinctively wants to do, is sleep during the night. But not too long, of course, otherwise you wake up drowsy and,
Yeah. Is there any length of time that's best for a siesta? And is there any research showing what long-term effects of having a siesta is?
Yeah, I think what I've found when I've done a lot of the research, Andrew, is that nothing's really specifically necessarily been done on shift workers.
Right.
You know what I mean? Which is really crazy, because they're kind of the ones that are the most, vulnerable to that. But I do know that some of the studies that have been done down in Adelaide and through Monash University and that in the sleep labs down there, is that they have looked at the different timings and so forth of I think it was people in the United States in the train industry, I think, about different types of lengths and so forth. But the thing is, you don't want to go too deep, as I said before, because you end up going deeper and deeper into that sleep cycle, which is around 90 minutes. Ideally, even a 90-minute nap would prove to be more beneficial because you're going through that whole sleep cycle. But if you're sort of taking it too much longer and then you're waking up in the middle of the sleep cycle, then you end up being more drowsier, and it takes a little bit while to kind of come out of that, that sort of drowsiness, which is, alertness is key, particularly if you're driving equipment and taking care of patients and so forth.
So when you're prioritising your management plan, your care of patients who come in, what do you focus on first?
Oh, sleep. 100%.
Just sleep.
Not just sleep, but it's where I start.
Yeah.
It's we can, there's so much in the health and wellbeing space, and it's all about nutrition and exercise, which is wonderful, and it's all very relevant. But sleep is kind of even more important. And interestingly, even earlier in this year, the Australian government actually released a report, ironically called Bedtime Reading. They did a research into sleep health awareness within Australia with a 171-page document. So bound to put anybody listening to sleep if you're wanting to find a sleep-inducing strategy, get them to read this actual document. But they've, just released a lot of the findings in that we are not only in a world that is, I think that even the World Health Organization has stated we are living in a world obesity epidemic, a world type 2 diabetes epidemic, but we're also living in a world sleep loss epidemic. And we can't last long without air. We can't last much longer without water. And then really sleep kind of forms in the ladder because we, and my best way to describe this really is that if you were to go without eating for 2 or 3 days, which I'm kind of not recommending as a new diet for 2020, that's for sure. But if we weren't to eat for 2 to 3 days, after that time we would feel tired, lethargic, would lose a bit of muscle mass. But generally speaking, you know what, Andrew, that you're going to feel okay. But if we were to not sleep for 2 to 3 days, we would barely be able to function and would begin to hallucinate. So that really gives us a huge clue as to just how critically important sleep is when it comes to our health and well-being. And we know shift workers, as we've already said, they experience that sleep deprivation, that sleep disruption, and so forth. But I do know from working with clients, the shift workers, that they're not always prioritising their sleep. They're not prioritising their sleep, and also they might be either knowingly or unknowingly doing self-sabotaging behaviours that is making their sleep disruption even worse. And I think we need to attack that first. I remember, I'm really reluctant to kind of prescribe a client with magnesium if I know that they are staying awake till 11 o'clock at night on their iPads. Like, you're kind of throwing away that hard-earned cash on supplements if you're not doing this as well. So I suppose that's where I kind of come at that sort of approach from all angles to kind of get the best patient outcomes. But absolutely, sleep is foremost. I've even kind of developed a better sleep program for shift workers for that very reason. Yeah, because it's critically important. We know that we feel so much better and we function much better when we've had a better night's sleep.
And restful sleep. So my next question's got to do with how people are fearful of getting sleep, therefore it prevents sleep. How often is this the major factor, the worry of sleeplessness, the worry of not getting rest?
Oh, I think it's a huge one. Yeah, they get stuck in that sort of anxiety, insomnia feedback loop where they know that they've got to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and they're panicking because they're kind of counting back the clock, thinking, oh my gosh, it's 5 hours to go. I've only got 4 hours to go. It is huge, and I think, and I'm glad that you kind of mentioned that, really, Andrew, because I think that really is one of the big drivers, kind of for most people in this crazy, stressful stressful world that we kind of live in, a lot of people have so much on their plate that they are going to bed feeling very anxious and wired. You know, we're tired and wired, so our nervous systems are just still on high alert, which is definitely going to prevent anybody from being able to sleep, because you know, if our brain's getting that signal feeling that we're not safe, then it's not going to be able to, you know, start to kind of wind down and you know, produce melatonin and so forth to enable the body to be able to sleep. So, yeah, the anxiety thing is huge. But again, I guess that's where we need as practitioners to really start kind of digging deep as to what's the cause of the anxiety, you know, what is specifically that they are worrying about, and you know, obviously refer on if required to the to those that kind of deal or specialise in this area, because it's it's very big. It's a very real thing.
And what about with sleep deficit? Once we're in that horrible quandary, how long does it take to be able to pay back the sleep deficit?
Actually, it's interesting because just recently heard about a study where they were working on adolescents that were sort of not having a lot of trouble sleeping, and they were staying up, you know, like couldn't fall asleep till about 1 o'clock in the morning, and so forth. But what they ended up doing is they actually ended up taking them camping for 2 weeks. So,
right,
of course,
nighttime.
Yeah. So what, obviously, you know, putting them in that natural cycle where, you know, where they're not on their iPads, they're not, you know, being exposed to the blue light, which adolescents do. They were forced into the environment where they were governed by the light and the darkness. And so then they were finding that they were getting sleepy by 9 p.m. and they were waking up at around 6. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah. So it can be done, but the thing is, in today's world, we are not living in that perfect camping kind of environment, are we? We've got this light toxicity going on, light at the wrong times and not enough light at the right times and so forth, which is kind of, messing with their circadian rhythms. But talking about the one night of sleep deprivation, there was recently a study that showed, well, it's not that recent, but it was showing that just one night of sleep deprivation causes a 40% reduction in our ability to handle glucose. And
wow.
I remember reading this thinking, oh, my Lord, like this is, again, just having all these epiphany moments of, okay, well, shift workers are prone to, as we said before, you know, the pre-diabetes, insulin resistance and stuff. Why is this? What's going on? And when you kind of read research like that, it makes sense, doesn't it? If that's happening, and then we're putting on top of, you know, eating the lollies and the chips and the pizza and that at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's no
double
wonder.
whammy.
It's no wonder that over time shift workers can be prone to developing those chronic conditions. So I think we've got to get that out there and tell people this, so at least arm them with the knowledge so that they can then make better choices and decisions around what they're doing, instead of just them not knowing it. You know, we're adults. We should be able to make our own decisions, but without that knowledge behind us, we're not likely to kind of change our behaviour.
With regards to eating, you mentioned that 40% reduction in glucose handling and how we tend to, you know, eat the wrong things at the wrong time. So chrononutrition. What is this, and how do we best handle this, particularly when you've got those extremely powerful urges of hunger driving you?
At 2 o'clock in the morning?
Yes, at the wrong time.
Yeah, well, chrononutrition kind of falls under the area of science called chronobiology, which is all about timings and cycles or rhythms. So, you know, certain things like our body temperature and melatonin, all designed to kind of get released at certain times of the day and night, which is a good thing, because if it all kind of happened at once, it would be chaos.
Yes.
But the term, it's good that it's really starting to get more and more, awareness around it. But the term was originally coined by a French doctor back in the mid-1980s called Dr. Alain Delebois. And it's based around the body's biological clock or our rhythms. And so the more we are in alignment with our circadian rhythm, the healthier we will be. It really, it kind of comes down to that. Chrononutrition, so kind of applies to not so much what we're eating, but when we're eating. And just to put this into context a little bit, Andrew, is how I kind of stumbled on this even myself. I was in my last year at studying nutrition up here in Brisbane at Endeavour College, and each time we had a client coming in, we had to get them to fill out the food diary, what they're eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and stuff. And I would have clients that would kind of actually eating fairly reasonably well, but they were still struggling with their weight. So I decided to kind of mix things up a little bit, and I started to ask them a different question when they were eating.
Right.
And that opened a whole different Pandora's box for me, I suppose, and what really led me down the path to dive deeply into this area of chrononutrition, because it's not so much relevant for people that work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, that eat at the same time and so forth. But for shift workers, this is crucial, absolutely crucial. Even, for example, your postprandial glucose response is actually much worse when you're eating, say, at 3 a.m. than if you've been having that same meal during the day. So basically when we eat during the night versus the day and how we metabolize it, it is drastically different. So this is why it's crucial that shift workers are aware and have an understanding of, what is a circadian rhythm, what happens, when I eat at this particular time, because we know, our appetite regulating hormones, you were alluding to before, Andrew, about having that sugar craving at, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's usually because our appetite regulating hormones are totally being skewed all over the place. Now, we know the studies have shown that leptin can drop by about 20%, which is that signal that tells us we're feeling full, versus ghrelin increases, which can make us kind of overeat and overeat on all the wrong things. So to help answer your original question of how do you stop the starving hunger cravings, well, what I firstly do recommend for my clients straight away is that to have a glass, again, I'm getting back to really basics here, but having that glass of water first, because a lot of the time that hunger and thirst really confuses it. Have a glass of water first, and then have something that contains proteins and healthy fats, so that it's going to help to stabilise your blood sugar, increase that satiety, that feelings of fullness, so that you're less likely to want to go for the donut, which is obviously the highly refined and processed sugars which your brain is needing. But, we know that that's certainly not going to be good for your health and well-being. As I said, we were alluding to before about the, body's ability to handle glucose. Our pancreas, incredibly, that a beta cell function is completely different at night. Like the pancreas does not function in the same capacity as it does during the daytime. And again, I keep harping on this. When I was reading it, thinking this is so important. I wish somebody had told me about this many years ago, because it could have changed my eating behaviour. And maybe, again, what I'm trying to do is to help people not become eventually develop the chronic health conditions of type 2 diabetes, because I know I've had patients that have, and I just think if they'd just been given this advice and recommendations and education beforehand, could I even potentially help one person? Well, great. But I think we can do a much bigger job on that by getting it more out to, flowing into the workplaces and in, nursing degree trainings being built into the curriculum.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Audra, what about this theory of taking a small amount of carbohydrates just before going to bed to boost serotonin?
Yeah. That's true. That has.
One would have to be careful about the type of carbs, I would imagine. You mentioned the donut before.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, how much, exactly when. But that's a good point to raise, because I've found that a lot of my night shifting clients, a lot of them would, they'd do their night shift and they would just go home and, have a shower and go straight to bed, which I totally get it. That's all what we feel like doing. But they would not have anything to eat. But that can then, lead to that disruption of your blood sugar to a point where our blood sugar drops so much that it fires up our stress response, and it can be enough to wake people up. So what we want to do is to help improve that sleep by having that little kind of snack or meal beforehand, just before sleep. So, for example, let's say instead of a plain bowl of porridge, which is pure carbohydrate, it's going to give you that high sugar spike on its own. But I get my clients to just chuck things on it, like, chia seeds, Greek yogurt, some just kind of healthy fats and protein that will help to stabilize that blood sugar. And it makes a huge difference to their sleep. Huge.
So making it like it might have the carbohydrate content, but it's a low glycemic index load.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Two scenarios I want to pose to you, and the first one is when you've got regular but inverted shift work, i.e., you work nights all the time. Do you change their chrononutrition so that their daytime eating is actually during the hours of nighttime, and their nighttime behavior, their sleep, which has to happen at some time, is during the daytime? Or do you still use the Earth's sun and nighttime as the sort of gauge of the biological clock?
Yeah, so I remember hearing once that I think somebody was recommending, while I was at uni, to recommend to a shift working client just to flip their meals, so having their big meal at midnight, for example, as if they were having the reverse.
It's never sat right with me.
Exactly. So I agree 1,000%, Andrew. And I do. When I heard that, I went, that just does not, sit with me as well. And I suppose it's kind of what led me down to the path. No, I will always just try and, as I alluded to before, the more we are in alignment with our circadian rhythms, the healthier we will be. So we know that, so we need to be in training those peripheral tissue clocks, the clock genes in our peripheral tissues, which is really our gut, our gastrointestinal tract, to coincide it with our circadian, SCN, our superchiasmatic nucleus in the brain, to kind of make sure everything is as close and as sync as how it should be. Now, as shift workers, we are out of sync to our circadian rhythms, but where we can, we need to be basically trying to do things to recollaborate those circadian rhythms. So what I do is, I recommend them to just eat as closely. So, for example, a night shift person would be to have their sort of main meal, dinner, what they would normally be doing before they go into their night shift, because it's going to be usually big enough that got your proteins, your healthy fats, and complex carbohydrates. It will give you enough energy to kind of get through your shift, help you to stabilize that blood sugar, so that you're less likely to get the cravings. I'm not saying that you won't get the cravings at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it's going to sustain you for much longer. And then when you come home from night shift, as I said, have that small something to eat just before bed, again, to help you to be able to kind of sleep through all the way through. Actually, and I might digress slightly there, Andrew. You've just reminded me of something, that there was a study that was actually eventually published in the Nurses and Midwifery Journal. Actually, you probably did see it, where they looked at driver alertness of somebody that was doing a night shift.
Basically it was 0.08 or something. It had the equivalent of 0.08 alcohol, is that right?
Oh, no, that was, it was what they were doing is that they were assessing driver alertness from somebody. They looked at eating during the night. So what they got people to do is either have a big meal during the night, a small, a snack during the night,
right,
or not eat at all. And then after doing that night shift, they put them in a 40-minute driving simulator, and they got them to, and so they just looked at their driving, and what they found is that those that had the larger meal during the night had more aggressive driving behaviour.
Oh, really?
More likely to swerve into different lanes. They were just not making better decisions, whereas those that had the snack, so just something small during the night, their alertness was much more prevalent, and even not eating was better than the big meal. And I think it's important for people to kind of know that.
It sort of smacks of an inverted intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
of course, is healthy. It's just that they're doing it the wrong way around.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. So what about things like favouring, say, soups, which are usually, not always, but usually more nutrient-dense, calorie-poor, over, the higher caloric type foods? Any work being done on that? What's your opinion?
My number one recommendation for night shifters is actually to have soups during the night.
Gotcha.
Because you're getting that liquid nutrition.
Yep.
It's reduced load on the gastrointestinal tract immediately. So again, we know that shift workers are prone to a lot of gastrointestinal complaints, peptic ulcer diseases and so forth over the long term. So having something small and nourishing, as you said, they're usually quite nutrient dense, but less taxing on the gut. And also our body temperature naturally drops around 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning based on our circadian cycle. And you would probably remember those times in the working during that, and you get that
You just put a jumper on, yep.
Yeah. Well, that's the body doing what it's naturally designed to do. And it does that, actually drops the body temperature to help keep you asleep, which is wonderful if you're actually sleeping, not so much when you're at work. So again, that's where a soup can actually be a great thing to kind of have. It's because you're kind of addressing both of those two things. But again, I would always be recommending not a big meal, but just something small to kind of tie them over. And I know that you wouldn't relate to this, and my sister's a nurse, so I'm very much aware of what goes on in those nursing wards at midnight. The takeaway pizzas get brought in, the Uber Eats, and so forth. There's a comfort.
You got it.
Yeah, it's a very real thing, and I get it, and I'm not saying to never do it again because, night shift is hard and it kind of makes it a bit of fun, but just over the long term, it can be very problematic, obviously.
Now, you've written a book about this. Is all that we've talked about, all of these support measures for your patients and indeed practitioners' patients, is all of this sort of advice covered in your book?
Yeah, so my book is obviously designed for shift workers to read. It's a very holistic kind of take on shift work health and wellbeing. So what I do is I talk about the really the 5 biggest struggles that we face working shift work is that kind of that sleep deprivation, which is a key driver behind the fatigue, the weight fluctuations, the stress, the anxiety, depression, a poor immune system, and also some of the impacts that it has on our relationships. So I have a very holistic take on health, I suppose, and it's written very much in an easy to style read because not every shift worker has a science background. For me, myself, I didn't start reading journal articles until I started studying. It being in aviation, I have no need or desire to read a journal article, so I know that I needed to make sure that the people who are reading it are tired. And a lot of us, we start reading a book and then we get shiny object syndrome and, head off onto another kind of thing. But I wanted to make sure that people who pick up and read this book read it from start to finish because everything in it is so vitally important. It's not, as I said, it's not really in depth because I just share my story right at the beginning as to give a bit of a backstory as to, some of the challenges I faced. But also to kind of, I suppose, be that little bit of a big hug for them, to give them a bit of a sense of hope that, there are things that they can do, which is why it kind of works beautifully, as I suppose, as a complement for health practitioners. It's just something extra to kind of give their clients, as opposed to as in addition to the prescription that they will be giving to their client. But it's a book that I wish somebody had given me 20 years ago, and I know that there's none around there. There's nothing out there to sort of support the shift worker, and so I suppose that's really why I wrote it.
So with regards to support references, if you like, for practitioners to look up to be able to show their shift work patients, look, this is a real issue. What sort of things do you suggest? There was a couple I found. ohnsrep.org.au was an Australian one, which described, the issues of shift workers. What ones do you recommend?
Oh, I've got over 100 references.
Oh, okay. Well, we won't list those right now.
So yeah. So it's very well referenced because we're evidence-based practitioners. It's kind of what we do. There's sort of a mixture, but all the references have to do with, as I was saying before, is that sleep. It's the weight fluctuations. Why chrononutrition? Why eating during the night is or chrononutrition? Why this is just vitally important that we get it out there and let people aware of it. But even I delve off into something slightly different because shift workers, we're prone to having relationship breakdowns, marital stress and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of that stems from the fact that, and has been shown in studies where the less sleep we have, it reduces our empathy and we're more likely to say and do things that we wouldn't ordinarily say.
Salient point. Well done. Yes.
Yeah. So again, having that awareness or letting somebody know that, because occasionally that's fine, but over time, that chronic, saying and doing things that we wouldn't ordinarily say, and that's obviously to our family members that we know and love, but also our workmates as well.
Yes.
But at least having that awareness, okay, when you get home or whatever, maybe I won't get into this conversation. I'll have a sleep first. And then we'll take up this conversation after I've had a good night, after I've had a good, sleep to sort of top up my sleep tank a bit. Because, I suppose, as I've sort of highlighted before, it's a very personal thing, and I generally am concerned about the shift workers of the world because I get it, I know it, I've lived it, I've breathed it, and it's just to kind of give them a resource out there, that there is hope,
Maybe that's where the ancestral saying came from about let me sleep on it. We'll certainly put up some relevant references and some of the references from your book so that practitioners can get a taste of the book up on the FX Medicine website. But thank you so much, Audra, for taking us through this real issue, not just on, some discomfort and some tiredness, fatigue, but we're talking about major health illnesses that are facing us on an economic level here. So thank you so much for taking us through these important issues today on FX Medicine.
You're welcome, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely chatting.
This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. A lot of what we do here at FX Medicine is made possible by the generous collaboration of our many guests and contributors. We extend our heartfelt thanks as we continue our education of evidence-based complementary medicine.